So thank you, Lillian, for that outstanding discussion of PROs and incorporating them into our pediatric clinical trials. Our next topic will be practical opportunities and approaches to improve the research and development landscape. We'll have two speakers for this. Beth Ann Baber from the Nicholas Connor Institute will make remarks first, followed by Lee Greenberger from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So Beth Ann.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I sincerely want to thank the IOM and the National Cancer Policy Forum and the ACS for bringing this opportunity to our community at a time in which is very critical that we can move forward and bring hope to the families and children of the future that this meeting will affect. So, like every parent in this room, when your child is born, the first and foremost thought to you is providing the highest quality of life for your child. Our son Connor was born on March 24th. He was a healthy 10-pound, 2-ounce baby boy, and believe me, it was a C-section. And when he came out, he looked like a rugby player, very healthy. This picture was taken 2 days before he was diagnosed with high-risk neuroblastoma stage 3. Again, you see he's a very healthy boy. At this time, we had no clue he had neuroblastoma. The next day, he started running a fever. He started having a wheezing sound that was uncharacteristic of asthma or pneumonia, but it sounded like pneumonia, and it's in the middle of July. We took him to his pediatrician, and he said, wow, it does sound like pneumonia, let's get a chest x-ray. And there was a tumor right in the middle of his chest that surrounded the vena cava, butted against the heart and the aorta. We're immediately sent to Rady Children's Hospital. Now, my husband and I have a very different background from many of the parents that have children that are diagnosed with cancer. We are cancer researchers ourselves. I was at the Salk Institute, and my husband was at the Scripps Research Institute. Our background is DNA damage and repair pathways. We study checkpoints, the pathways in which chemotherapy agents and radiation target rapidly growing cells, such as cancer, to kill them. But a 15-month-old boy is rapidly growing. We knew from our studies in the lab that the agents that we were going to be forced to use on our child to save his life would not only affect the cancer cells in his body, but they would also target the normal cells in his body by inducing mutations that we never want our children exposed to. We tailored his treatment based on quality of life. That was our first and foremost thing that when we decided to make treatment decisions. We were surprised that treatment decision support tools were not available. Molecular profiling wasn't in the clinic at the time. We were advocates for personalized medicine, and this was back in 2005. We were shocked at what was available. We did make our judgments based on the biomarkers that were provided. He was negative for all the biomarkers in neuroblastoma. Even the histology did not determine that it was 100% neuroblastoma by the pathologist experts that viewed his slides. The metabolic late-stage markers were all negative. We had no choice, but the recommendation was a high-risk neuroblastoma protocol, a bone marrow transplant. Because of our background and the lack of positive markers, we decided to downgrade the chemotherapy protocol because we wanted our child to have the highest quality of life. If it wasn't for a long period of time, he would at least be able to be a child. We went with a lower form of chemotherapy. Luckily, the tumor resected, moved away from the vena cava and heart after 3 rounds of chemotherapy, followed up with surgery, mopped it up with some more chemotherapy. And then at the time we had that decision, well, do we do a retinoic acid treatment? There were no biomarkers available in the clinic, but there were biomarkers that had been published, just like there were biomarkers to determine if a child may lose their hearing due to having carboplatin or cisplatin therapy. We knew of these, and that frustrated us very much. We made all these decisions, and it was that black box. We gave them the therapeutic protocols and hope for the best outcomes. And to our surprise, and probably many others, it was a very successful outcome. He is a 10-year-old boy. He loves extreme sports. He flies out of skateboard bowls, as you can see. He's going down large mountains in California on his mountain bike, scaring the death out of me, wanting to protect him. But it was a successful outcome. That outcome might not have been as successful if we decided to go against our decisions on focusing on quality of life versus survival. During the process, I mentioned that I knew of biomarkers that were published, that were promising discoveries and that were being published, but yet they weren't in the clinic, and that was our frustration. There's a huge gap between promising discovery and clinical trial, especially for children, and it's widening. And as the economy suffers earthquakes, just like we do in California, that gap is widening further and further, especially for patient populations like our children. We need to bridge that gap, and that gap right now is being bridged by very lean biotech companies and innovative centers, by lean national institutes, and doing the best we can. But the best does not always works out. We need tumor samples to validate biomarker panels for provide therapy decision support tools. We need patient outcome data. We had a wonderful introduction to patient-reported outcomes. Well, Connor's patient-reported outcome would have been no. His every word at that time was no. So even if, are you feeling well? No. Are you feeling good? No. And so, but patient-reported outcome data in however form, proxy or patient, is very important to be associated with tumor samples and the molecular profiling data associated with those samples. And venture philanthropy to support that bridge. And additionally, as Greg mentioned, is appropriate industry incentives for this patient population. Incentives for the rare disease community is important, and I support all those incentives. But pediatric cancer patients are also different from the rare disease community. If we look at the economic benefit in developing something for rare diseases, a drug is usually developed with support for that patient over the lifetime of that patient. It's even worse for pediatric cancer patients because you're giving a drug to a patient in a smaller time frame, which is less likely for that company to make a profit or be able to justify to their shareholders to move that forward. We have today the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, which is an excellent example of private-public partnerships that bridge this gap. We have many other examples too. We have the MS, Multiple Sclerosis Society, that also has a similar program. We have the Michael J. Fox Research Foundation, and the myelin repair and the cystic fibrosis that we saw. Many other examples and other types of disease that these organizations effectively bridge the gap. Well, we have to bridge the gap for our children, and it requires all stakeholders, not just our national institutes or the academic centers. It requires patients and families, clinicians, funding agencies. For example, in our funding agencies, we have things called SBIRs, or Small Business Innovation Research Grants, or STTRs, Small Business Tech Transfer Grants. These is a source where maybe we should put an emphasis on that some of these grants go to pediatric cancer. They're grants that small businesses such as the biotech community in San Diego or Boston or other areas can move things forward. We have philanthropic organizations. We mentioned earlier, I think Eric mentioned, that we have over 3,000 foundations that decide what they want to give to disease area, but not really focused. We need to find a way to focus that and target giving so it make an impact, similar to what we will hear from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. They've made tremendous amount of impact by focusing what they fund and move forward. Of course, we know that the academic research institutions have been trying to carry the ball for a long time. And the medical industry, we need to provide the best incentives for them in order to move things forward. We need to work hand in hand. We need to have them at the table. We need to listen to what their needs are. The regulatory agencies, Greg mentioned all the difficulties they are. We need to be able to work with them. We need to advocate, and we need to make policymakers aware of our needs and make them our champions. And last, people never talks about the payers. We need to have the payers in the room. We need to have them know what our issues are. We need to educate them, and we need to know what they need in order to help us provide the best treatments for our children. So I would like to thank again, the IOM, the American Cancer Society, for this opportunity. And I would like to thank Dr. Lee Greenberger to be here to provide an excellent example to our community of how we can bridge this gap. Thank you.